Is anyone missing? Okay.
Got to think. I have to think.
Wait, where's No? What? No.
All right. Ready to get up front?
Ooh, going over events today.
Wait, where's Will?
All right. So before we start, uh, I keep hearing people ask, "Where's Will?" He might show up, but it's double XP weekend on RuneScape, so it's kind of locked in right now. Uh, anyways, today's class is about events, and there's a lot of them, as you can see. I'm not gonna go over them individually, so it'll be a pretty quick class. Question?
My perfectionism is telling me that there's some event receivers over here. I don't know about that, but
Yeah, quite a few. Question?
It isn't really about anything like that, but since class is gonna be fast, it's still gonna last the same amount of time. But you can like, if
It'll
you're
still be a
done
full
early, you
class,
can
but
like.
the lesson will be pretty quick.
Okay,
okay.
just want to make sure. So then I can just sit in through the whole class.
All right. Well, let's start off with custom events. That's what these are. Uh, this up here is a event definition. It lets you define events. Uh, so I could configure this, and at the top, I'll just call it event test, and then I'll submit it. And then this is a event sender. I'm able to send a event through it. So I'll configure this and set it to event test. So now this definition is linked to this sender. And if I configure the receiver to the same thing, where is it? Event test. If I were to send a event through this, I will then receive it over here. It'll run through this and also come out up here. And I can have multiple of these event receivers to receive the event. Uh, Now you're probably thinking, why is this useful at all? Because the circuits are already running into each other. Why do we need another way to do it? Uh, this mod menus, you wouldn't need one for a mod menu, but guess there would be a way to integrate it. Uh, Another cool thing about events is that you're able to configure the definition and add ports or types. So I'll add a boolean and I'll just call it bool. And now I have to send a boolean with the event, and on the receiving end, I'll get the same boolean. Uh, Now, one of the most useful use cases for events is sending them to everyone. This is a way to network stuff. But we'll get more into detail on that in tomorrow's class. Tomorrow's class is solely on networking, and I would recommend you go. It's a very important class for circuits. But if you're using it just for like the local client or whatever, it's good for getting data from inside of an object board out in the world scope. And in my example today, I'll show you what I mean by that. So this alone, does this make sense on what will happen when I fire this? Yeah, okay. If it wasn't clear, when I fire it, it'll output whatever the Boolean was here, and it'll run it. Importantly, if this Boolean up here is false, right? Until I run this event, these down here aren't going to change. By default, they're false, so it is false. So if I change this to true, these still say false because I haven't ran the event yet. So that's important. And you can add every single port type. You can add lists. You can add even different types of objects. Like those, you could add a button port. So yeah. A very important thing to know about events is that this is how all circuits start. Every single circuit starts with a event receiver. You know, assuming you want it to run and actually do something. Think of a event as like a battery, right? It needs to get power. This is where it's getting its power from. So if we go over to the custom events over here, and we'll start in this far corner. These are pretty standard events. Notably, there's this giant wall of events here. These events run whenever whatever they're called happens. So, for example, player left runs when a player leaves. Room loaded runs when the room is loaded. You know, most events are pretty self-explanatory for what they do, but they don't run when you send a event like the other one we were just doing. That's a key difference. But like if I wanted something to constantly be updating, I would use the update event. The update event sends a circuit like pulse or power on every single frame on your device. Like every single time a frame is rendered, this thing is running. Update 30 hertz updates 30 times a second, give or take, you know. Since it can be inconsistent, there's this thing called delta time. This is the delay between the two ticks. And this number is constantly changing because, you know, on a good day, maybe your screen is updating at 30 hertz, but odds are it isn't. So if you hover over this, no one click on the delta time so everyone can see it. You'll see the number is constantly changing, but it's like an absurdly like small number. Yeah. Okay. Is there any event from this giant list of them? Just kind of skim it. Are there any events up here that you're like, oh, why does that run? Like it isn't self-explanatory enough. Test event. Oh, that is a good one. Test event. It isn't really for like a game. Like the final game really wouldn't be using a test event. Test event is for, believe it or not, testing. The way of how you use it is you go into your Maker Pen, and under Tools in the settings on the right, you click on Circuits and Debugging, and in there's a button that says Send Test Event. When you click that button, this will go off, and underneath that button, there's a thing that says Test Event Parameter. You can type something in there, and then whatever you type will be on the string port on the test event. That's good if you wanted it. If you wanted like multiple test events, you could have one that's like start, and that could be a debug way to start your game. And then you would only start it if the parameter said start, or like end if it said end. Default.
What about for event receiver player collision?
Player collision. A player collision is if one player touches another player. So if I were to go up to you and just like tap you, then both of us will be the port. Will be on the ports. It's not consistent. It's not like player A hit player B, because there's not really a way to tell. It's not like a matter of like if I punched you or not. It's just like if we like made contact in any way. That's player collision. Uh, one I'm gonna specify, even if no one is asking. Player leaving is different than player left. And Otto was just asking. Player leaving is the like last tick right before the player leaving is invalid. So this player is a valid player on there, and on player left, that is right after they left, so that's an invalid player. The reason why it specifies is because there's a difference between each invalid player, but like it won't really matter. It's the only reason you'd use it is if you were checking if like a player you saved in a player variable was the player who just left. And then you would check if they're equals. If they're equal, then you know it was them. But the point of this, since they're still valid, you can check things like roles. You know, if they have a role, once that player's invalid, you don't know if they had roles or not. So like that's a good way to check. All right. Any other events over here before we move on to the next thing? There are a lot. Nope. Okay. Let's move on to the player definition board. We went over how like world scope is different from when you're in an object board in like class 1. But just to clarify, if there is a event, like there could be some events in here that aren't out here. And you're about to see there's actually a lot of events that are in the player definition board that you just can't access from out here. I have 2 of them here, dude, so you can edit it. And for you guys, you can look over at the board. Cause yeah, we've already placed a bunch of these. They won't be here for you, but yeah. I recommend taking a look. Just place a player definition board and then play in that board put a event receiver, then like make sure like just like scroll through and you'll see there's a lot more than in world scope. But here are some neat ones. Just starting at the top. Okay, so what just happened was somebody placed a player definition board and clicked activate on the configure menu. Please do not do that. The reason why that caused so much lag is because every single one of us have our own player definition boards. They're invisible, you can't see them, but you have them. So let's say you only have one chip in there, you know, there's like what like 10 of us right now, the survivors. It had to make a duplicate of that chip 10 times. Then if you have 2, it's 20. So like it gets the number goes up a lot. That doesn't actually add to your chip count if you're curious. It only adds like for the one player definition board right here. The clones per player don't affect your chip count. Oh, clambering is like when you go up to an object and do this. You see how I just like lifted me up above it? And I clambered over it. That's clambering. Yeah. There's a ton of locomotion events as of kind of recently, not that recently. You'll notice outside of the player definition board, there's all of these on player blinked, on player jumped, on player sprinted, on all that, and it outputs a player. In the player definition board, it has on blank, and the player is whoever's player definition board that is. So like, it won't run for each person, if that makes sense. That's why these have a player port and these don't. Hope that makes sense. Anyways, some of the cool events are for like different components. Collision detection volume, hit player. There's a component called the collision detection volume. If you want to know if it hits someone, this is how you receive it. Explosion hit player, melee hit player. Oh, melee is like a sword prop, not the collision detection volume. Explosion hit player is the explosion component, and like the grenade prop will do it. Projectile hit player, any like ranged weapon or projectile launcher will make that go off. And do we have explosion hit player twice? I guess we do. Yeah, that's pretty much those. Yeah. Okay. Any events you guys are curious about in here that you want more specification on, or like you're chilling? Seek.
What does it have to do with the level reached one?
Level reached. Oh, I don't know why that's in the player definition board. That's also outside of the board. Have you played Make It to Midnight?
Yeah.
So in Make It to Midnight, there's that progression system. That's like after each game you get some points, and then you'll hit
XP.
marks and you'll get tickets. Yeah, you get XP. You'll get tickets. We don't really go over this in the class, but because it's more advanced. But I guess I can show you. There's this. Do you guys know what like a Google Sheet is, or like a spreadsheet? Okay. So this is the room level chip. It lets you define levels and like what's on each level. If you configure it, you'll see like a spreadsheet kind of looking thing. And what's really cool about this is it's technically called a data table. You're able to like make your own in Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, and then export it as a CSV file, comma separated value, and then paste it into here, and it'll just format it correctly, which is really neat for like larger data sets. But there's once you define your levels, you're able to set how like far or like how much XP you'll need for each one. And then to add XP, you use the player award XP chip. So once they hit a level, this will go off. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is like a Will Chill question. This will go off for every level they hit. So if you reached, like, if you somehow skipped a level or whatever, there was like, you're on level 1, but then you got enough XP to hit level 5, it'll go off for 2, 3, 4, and 5 on like one tick. Okay, that's what that one does. If you want to know more about that, there's a whole like Rec Room dev article on RecNet. Look up Rec Room progression, and you'll see it. Yeah. Player grounded. I'm not grounded when I land. I'm now grounded. The difference between grounded and landed. Landed is when I jump. I've landed. But like if I'm like flying or something, right? And then I drop. Now I'm grounded. But I think grounded goes off even for this, so it's kind of confusing. Yep. Yeah. Any other questions before I move on to a way you can use circuits? Oh, I mean, a way you can use events. Let me show you one more thing about the custom events. You can configure this, right? I guess we might go over this in networking, but I'll just do it now. You can configure this, and then you can choose the event, but then underneath there's another choice called target. And the choices on here are all, authority, local, others, player, and room authority. Those are who are going to receive the event. So like I could send it, but then whoever it's set to go to is who will receive it. So if I had it set to all, right, I'll send it, but then everyone, including me, will receive it, right? And that'll make the network go up a little bit. Authority, we go over that next class. Maybe I should be doing this next class. So I'll tell you what authority does tomorrow. Local player is yourself, only you will receive it. Others is everyone but yourself. Player is cool. It adds an extra port to the event, and you're able to specify what player is going to get it. And room authority, whoever's room authority will get it. All right. Let's move on to something cool you can do. This is neat. I do this a lot, and it saves you a lot of chips. So I recommend kind of getting a hang of this. There. Actually, do I have a thing? Oh, before I go on to the example, I have to do this too. This will be quick, don't worry. Okay, here are a ton of components, and a lot of them have triggers. I'm pretty sure every component in the game has some sort of like trigger. So like when I press this or release it, these are going off. But the only reason why they go off is because there's events inside of this button that say pressed or released. And a important thing to know is that it's only in this button, right? If I clone this button, that will have its own set of events. That event isn't going to go off for this other button getting clicked. But then like all of these have stuff. This button, same idea. Interaction volume has all of these. Most of them are like already a part of the board by default, but like they're good to know. Like this throw handle has a pickup and release event, but for some reason there's not a port for it. Or actually, maybe this throw handle is just old. I could be wrong. One sec. Let's update the board. Oh yeah. Okay. There's a pickup and release. And then these are kind of cool. You wouldn't I guess you wouldn't immediately get it, but like it makes sense. Costume dummy has events for when someone equips and unequips it. That could be useful. And a seat has an event for when the seated player changes. If the player is valid on the new seated player, then someone sat in it. If the player is invalid, then they got up. Kind of wish they were two separate events. It's kind of annoying that it isn't, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. Yeah. Question. Yeah, that's brand new, actually. That's why it's not here, but all of the ranged weapons have events for when they're fired. You'll notice like pretty recently a bunch of guns just like got object boards for some reason. And that's why here are the events. There's there's one for on fired. This is an example of it not being on the board by default. But it's there. Seek.
What about the projectile launchers?
The projectile launcher also has events for when it is fired, but obviously you'd have to manually fire it with like circuits. So it's not really like an input thing where like a player is inputting something which would then cause it. But when these got a board or like maybe one update after, the projectile launcher got a event called like projectile launcher fired all. Is that what it's called? Will made this, so I would hope he would know what it's called. But he's locked in on RuneScape, so I guess we'll never know.
Wait,
Yeah.
sorry, Snug, did you just say something?
What's the event that's synchronized in the projectile launcher and ranged
Yeah, so
weapons?
that's gun fired all. There is also gun fired like local, I think it's called. The all will also run when other people fire the weapon. Local is just if you fire it yourself.
Yeah. That's another thing. A lot of the events run for everyone. So like when this button is pressed, all of you guys know that. So like this event will go off for everyone, except by default, this button is filtering out everyone and ensuring that only the person who pressed it is who's gonna like run this port after. Dooman, can you edit this board? You can see here. These are the events right here, and the events say what player pressed it or released it. But then right after, it's checking if the local player should run, meaning if this player should run. This chip is special because if the player is invalid, it'll run if they're authority. So that's what local player should run does. But what that means is that this part right here from the event to this chip, we're all running. But then right after this filters, only the person who pressed it is running the rest of the circuits. This is useful for saving networking, which we'll go over in tomorrow's class, but it's good to know. Not every single input device has it. For example, the interaction volume, nothing is happening for like you guys when I click this. So there's that event in there is only going off for me. You guys aren't receiving it, and that's why in this board it's not checking if local players should run. Same thing for I think swing handle. Oh, I guess not. Oh wait. The board is really big. Oh, yeah. Same thing for swing handle. You guys don't really know when I swing it, kinda. So the event is only running for the person who swung it. Same thing for trigger handles, and for some reason throw handles, even though like I feel like you guys would be able to tell that I threw it, because you just saw me throw it. And like trigger volumes, for you guys, you have to know that I'm in it, so the event will run for you. And same thing for these on equip and seated player changed goes off for everyone. Oh, I equipped it. Okay. Does that concept make sense for like how they run for everyone and how they don't? Okay. Now let's go to the example.
Snug, were you going to make something that hooks into the same central board?
Yeah. Do you want to do it?
Cool. Sure.
Your mic is horrible, but go for it.
Let me try to fix that. Just give me 1 second.
Okay, I'll set you up.
Does this mic sound any better, or is it too quiet?
We can like understand you. It's not a problem. It's just like some background
Okay. So,
noise.
as Snug has shown you today, part of like the main features of events, there's one of them is that you can create custom events. You put down an event definition, and then you put down both an event sender and event receiver that you bind to that event. You can put specific like port information on it to pass through it. Anytime you run an event sender to that event, it will take your inputs if you have any, and then propagate that out to event receivers anywhere in the room. They could be at the same level. They could be at a level even higher if you're already nested in a board below the definition. It could be in some child board. So part of one of the main things you can do with this is it can actually save you a ton of chips and effort if you make changes to a system that is shared across multiple parts of your room. So for instance, if you have like if you're making a game similar to like Showdown, which as you probably know is made with all UGC tools, same as you're learning here, you could make, for instance, like the guns, and when you pull the trigger, you're going to have a whole bunch of logic that runs. It'll shoot the bullet. It might check who you're aiming at or whatever. And then you hit somebody, it'll run a whole other set of logic. What you can do is you can, instead of just copying those chips for every single gun in the room, something they actually do in Showdown is they just have one central system, and each gun, instead of copying all the chips over into their board, there's just event receivers and senders inside the board. And then those just go over to that one central spot, which has the benefits, one, of saving on your chip count, and secondly, if you ever make any changes to the system, you just have to change it in one place instead of having to go everywhere and change that. So I'm going to make something like that. Let's make, how about you pull the trigger and it updates text to whoever it's pointing at. So we have this trigger handle here. Let me detach the board. I'm just going to configure the board so it's detached. I'm guessing this is on an animation gizmo, which is why it's not falling. How is this? Is this on an? Okay, cool. So let me take out an event center chip. Also, let me turn off push to talk so you don't have to hold down T. Okay, cool. So let me take out event sender, and we're going to hook this up to primary action press. And we can customize this event. We'll name it something special. Trigger pressed. And let's, for instance, attach the actual object. So I'm going to add a port. So type rec room object. I can find that in the list. All right, this one's not alphabetic. It's at the top. Okay, cool. So I'm going to add this rec room object port, and it's just going to, when you pull the trigger, it's going to send a reference to itself. So let's configure this event center and make it fire that trigger pressed event. You can see the port has appeared on it. So let me wire up this reference from the board into the handle port. So next up, let's pull out an event receiver. Let's also configure this to the same thing. Trigger pressed. Cool. So you'll see this knows the event type, so it also has this handle port here. So now, how about we just, when you pull the trigger, it looks at whoever you're pointing the trigger at, and it'll put their name into a text component. So let's take out the text component.
Studies show that
Cool. So
people-
now, basically what's going to happen is we're going
can
to
focus
figure
better.
out who he's pointing at. We're going to get the player, going to get their name, convert the name. It's loaded the name already. Will be a string, and we'll just put it into set text here. So we have the exec. That part's easy. Let's just wire the exec up to the text. And you might be wondering, all we have is the handle. So how are we going to know who it's pointing at? Shouldn't we maybe be like sending over the player name when we click it? But it turns out we don't have to do that. The handle is actually all the information we need. We can just do a raycast, see which player it's hitting, and just go from there. Like we could do it all on the handle, but since the whole point of this is to save chips. If we do it after the event receiver goes through, that'll save us a little bit of chips, so we only have to do it once there. So let's take out the raycast chip. I don't think we've gone over this chip yet, but basically it's just, you can kind of imagine it as shooting like an imaginary line out from the starting point, and it will go until it hits something, and then it'll tell you some information about when it hits. Like there's a hit, bool, false if it doesn't hit anything, true if it does hit something, player and object. This will usually either only be one or the other, or neither. The distance, how far until it hits something, hit position, and surface normal. You can think of the normal as like if you hit the ground, no matter what angle you hit it from, like the normal will be sticking straight up because that's like perpendicular to the ground plane. Okay, it has these two inputs, start position, direction, and max distance. We don't care about max distance. We don't really need to limit it, so what you can do, this is a float field, you can just literally just type in the word infinity, and that will work. It'll just have an infinite distance. If you wanted to, you could say something like 100 or whatever.
Yeah,
And now
hold
we
on.
need
I'm
the-
gonna pause him real quick because he skipped over this. You can configure a raycast and set it to ignore objects or ignore players. If it's set to ignore objects, it'll go through it. And it's stuff. If it's set to ignore players, it'll go through the player and ignore it. And then obviously the player port or object port won't ever be valid. All right. Yeah. My bad.
That's a good thing to bring up because we're going to want to configure it here and turn off. We're going to turn on ignore objects. It's just a little toggle. So now when you run the chip, it'll just be as if the objects don't exist as far as the chip is concerned. So it has two inputs, start position and direction. That's fairly simple. We want to get the position of the handle. So we'll take it a get position chip. Wire this up to the handle reference. So this is just whatever handle you use to fire this, it's going to be putting itself through the value, so like you'll know you have the right handle. This will give you the vector position of the handle. Let's hook that up in the start position. For direction, like the position, that kind of makes sense. It's just wherever it is, but like how are we going to get direction? This is just like an object. If you want to go like the thing you're pointing at, that's usually forward vector. There are other vectors, like you could go up vector or like the right vector, some cross product combination of them. That's not too helpful here. Let's just get the forward vector, which is when you're holding it, just
We'll go
whatever is in
over
front of you.
vectors in next week's class. So
Yeah, if you're confused about the vectors, don't worry about it. We're going to get to them soon. Just think of it as like coming out of the handle. Cool, so that is all set up. So this is going to give me a player. So let me, first we should check, firstly, that you actually hit something. Actually, we don't even need to tell if you hit something. Let's just check if the player is valid. They actually both work. I guess if you're ignoring objects, like it's kind of just like the same thing. If player is valid, we can actually hook that up in between here to just completely ignore the, actually even better, let's just show like null or like invalid if the player isn't valid. So let me take out an if value chip. We covered this shortly earlier. So we'll give you one value if the input is true, another value if the input is false. And let's combine that with a valid chip on the player. So this chip will check if the player that you're hitting is valid. Let's hook that up into if value. If the player is valid, we can just get the player directly. Actually, let's run this through the string first. ToString. So we'll look at the player, we'll get their username. When you just run ToString on a player, it just gets their display name like you see above their head. So if the player is valid, we'll show that username. If it is not valid, we'll say invalid player. Cool. So this will just tell you right here at the very end of this if value when you pull the trigger if you're putting over a valid player or not, and their username if they're valid. So we have that string. Let's just hook that up to the text. We have the event trigger exec. Let's hook that up to the text exec. And I believe that everything. So now could you shoot me with this? Cool. So as you can see, it has my name there, and that's working as expected. But the cool thing is, let me actually even just get rid of this entire board. Let me just like delete everything in it. So now we literally just have, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Let me edit in so I just have that one chip. I literally just need one chip, so let me pull it out.
Just put the event in the board, but then have Doomman show how you connected it. Okay, I'm gonna take over while Will does this. So to make it like more organized, I'm gonna take this event sender and I'm gonna put it into the board so that there's not just like a loose chip. Then Will, can you hear your mic? Will, you can hear your roommates. So I'm gonna edit into here, and I'm going to connect it to the event in here. There's an event called Trigger Pressed. You can't see it. You'll see it in a sec. But we kind of went over it a second ago. And I'm just going to, oh wait, oh no, that's this event. I need like handled, oh, alright. That it's called primary action pressed. That's what the event's called. And I'm going to connect it to our trigger pressed event. And I'm going to get a self chip to reference the trigger handle. And Doomman, can you edit this board to show what's in there? So you can see, here's the event. This event goes off when someone clicks the button. Then I'm sending the self, which is that trigger handle specifically, through this event, and I'm receiving it over here. Now, the neat thing about this, which Will was saying, is that I can clone this. I'll just move the object board like over here or something. And now the only chips inside of here were those 3 chips, but it connects to all of this. So, as you clone more, you'll save more and more chips than if you were to have all of this inside of each one of these boards. And you'll see it still works if I point this right here with a good aim. I see it running, but my aim is rough. Oh, is it? Oh, are you scaled? Yeah, okay, that's why I wasn't running. I'd be scared. Alright, there. As you can see, his name showed up. If I do it on Ducky, his name shows up. If I do it on me, my name shows up. If I point away, it goes off. But you can also see Ducky points it at me, and it still goes off, right? He points it somewhere else. Invalid, points it at 1, it goes off. Like, that's cool. And I can keep on cloning this, and it'll keep referencing it over here. And a nice thing about this, like Will was saying, is if I want to change anything on here, like maybe I change the raycast range to only be like a meter in front of it or something, instead of having to go to each one of my trigger handles and change the number on that raycast, I can just change it here and it'll in turn affect the rest of them. So your guys' challenge is gonna be make a do any other handle like a swing or throw handle, and put onto text the position it was whenever whatever trigger happened. So like on a throw handle when you threw it, have on a piece of have on text like what the position was of it when it was thrown, or if you have it on a swing handle, the position of it when it was swung. And if you want to be real fancy, maybe you could use a string concat to do like a swing handle position and then the position. You know, not mandatory. All right. Have fun. That's your assignment, and we'll think of something harder
One
to
thing
make.
else, I have 2 handles minimum. 2 handles.
Oh yeah, make sure you have at least 2 handles going to a central system, like how we just showed in this example. This is gonna stay here, so you can come up and look at it more closely. Edit into the handles. Do whatever you need.
Wow.
Do you have roommates?